has the time to do what they love anymore, right? Well, I'm sure a lot of you are kind of wondering what I've been up to and hoping that eventually I'd take the time to explain to you a little bit about the things that I've been doing, which tonight I will not be, in order to explain to you another story. And yes, just like in the old days.
Either put on these glasses or start eating that trash can.
So, Merry Christmas. And this will be sort of a Christmas episode. We'll be talking a bit about the Christmas Chronicles. Not necessarily the movie Christmas Chronicles, but we will be talking about a Christmas movie. Though while on the subject, I think it's a good idea to watch the Christmas Chronicles. I mean, it's a great Christmas movie. It's kind of like a remake or something, an homage to the Christmas movie that we will be talking about. And it has Kurt Vogel Russell. I mean, what a great... Vogel is his middle name, right? Like, that's... Come on. So, watch the Christmas Chronicles. In fact, watch any of the movies with Snake Plissken. He's been in quite a few good movies. Not just Death Proof, not just Escape from L.A., Escape from New York as well. I don't even know how many Christmas movies he's been in. But, you know, go right back to the beginning. I think his first episode is Kevin in Dennis the Menace. Probably worth checking out. And The Swiss Family Robinson, or The Man from UNCLE. Kind of a secret agent television show from the 60s. He was in a few of those. I think the FBI, he played Dan Winslow for an episode, actually. Though I'm into those wacky ones like The Horse in the Gray Flannel Suit, or The Computer Who Wore Tennis Shoes. I mean, an identifiable and sympathizable character and relatable story. Or, you know, actually, pretty much any movie about Kurt Russell when he was young I can relate to. The Barefoot Executive with that chimpanzee. Yeah, totally. That's like my life story.
He's gonna make it right to the top. That crazy moving, grooving kid who just won't stop. He's gonna rearrange the good old status quo and get it all together with the things he's got to know. He's gonna make it. He's gonna make it. He's gonna take this cockeyed world and shake it. He's gonna show them he's a winner in the end. With a little bit of luck and a little bitty barefoot friend.
Not quite Now You See Him, Now You Don't. That's like the Kevin Bacon movie where he's like invisible, but it's better because, you know, Kurt Russell. No offense to Kevin Bacon. I mean, but I am the next Kevin Bacon. And frankly, I'd rather be Kurt Russell.
When they start rapping that he's too young, he makes his mind up that he'll wind up number one. And the whole wide world will know that he's around. Though other cats get uptight and try to put him down. He's gonna make it. He's gonna make it. He's gonna take this cockeyed world and shake it. He's gonna show them he's a winner in the end. With a little luck and a little bitty barefoot friend.
But like I said, this isn't about that. This isn't about Kurt or Captain Russell or the Stargate. Not necessarily, anyway. It might be sort of about Escape from LA or Escape from New York, but really only as far as being an allegory. In the Vanilla Sky sense. Now, what's an allegory again?
What? No. Oh, Charlie came home from school the other day in tears because some big kid told him there was no such thing as Santa. And you know, Neil, well, he sat him down and
You told him that there was a Santa Claus.
Well, all he said was that Santa was more like a feeling, you know, more like a state of mind than a person.
Kind of like Neil. And who gave you permission to tell Charlie there's no Santa Claus? I think if we're going to destroy our son's illusions, I should be a part of it.
Yeah, but you're never around, are you, Scott?
Oh, please.
Listen, all we are trying to do is give Charlie a firm grasp on reality.
It's a good idea. You don't want kids running around using their imaginations.
There's a recent movie I actually just walked in on everyone watching at the house here called Immortal. Now, there's been a bunch of Immortals, and even in the year 2019 when Immortal was made, there's been a bunch more Immortals, but I'm talking about the one with Dylan Baker. Now, I'm not necessarily suggesting you watch the whole film, so I'm just going to put this clip in.
Why use an allegory? Why represent characters and worlds as something else? Why not just say what you want to say outright. Anyone? Kyle? You got an idea? Why would an author use an allegory?
What do you think?
You can get a job teaching it.
Well, I'll let you have that one this time, since
Dylan Baker, right?
Such a tough
Pretty
guy.
great.
Yes, Jamie.
Maybe they write allegories because what they want to talk about is taboo.
That's why.
Excellent. Even further than taboo. What if it's illegal?
It could be.
What if it's dangerous?
It usually is.
Can you imagine why someone in an Islamic extremist country
Or in Iraq.
would stone people for drawing pictures of Muhammad?
Like here?
They want to write in code when they're talking about religion. Huh?
Too fictitious?
What if, like, their point is hard to make or not something people agree with too quickly and they need to, I
Yeah.
don't know, like, paint a
Could be.
picture?
Very good. That's a great point. If you're saying something that everyone agrees with already, then you're just preaching to the choir. But if your theme goes against the grain of society, you might want to ease into it slowly. Excellent.
Okay, Mr. Sugar.
Well, an allegory is a form of art, whether that be a picture or a story, which gives us its meaning through the use of symbols. Sort of like the other Kurt Russell movie, Soldier, from 1998, where Kurt plays Todd, number 3465. Because that's all I needed. As I was putting this slide on the screen, the movie was playing Dylan Baker explaining why someone would use an allegory. Because you see, through the use of symbols, many people would consider an allegory to be an extended type of metaphor. When used as a literary device, a writer may use an allegory in order to convey a message based on morals, history, politics, spirituality, and other such subjects. The actual word allegory derives from the ancient Greek and is translated to mean implying something, and this translation further helps us understand its function. When used as a form of figurative language, the allegory can be made useful in addition to things such as motivational speeches, informative speeches, or spoken lessons, because it's used to convey meaning in a more understandable way. Now, all that's just a bunch of hubbubaloo, because the real reason we use allegories is because in some cultures, like, the truth is illegal, and you can't even talk about it unless you're talking about something else. An example being Mother Goose, whom herself was arrested when it was made clear that she was talking about the royal families. Anyway, I'm going to continue recommending Christmas movies for your whole family, my favorite being the Finnish Rare Exports film. I remember seeing this in Santa Cruz without any subtitles, but luckily I had gone into the theater with an astronomer from Finland who happened to come down from the hill at University of California, Santa Cruz. And even though there were no subtitles, he was willing to loudly narrate the entire film for the entire audience. It was pretty baller. But the point of the movie essentially is that there's a rich man from America who wants to dig up the ancient and frozen original Santa Claus, not realizing the depth of the metaphor. You see, not all things are simply allegory, and the Santa Claus is very real. In it, they awaken a beast, the Santa Claus, which has been frozen for 1,000 years by wiser Finns than these. And it's up to this group of Finnish friends and the man's son to save not only Finland this time, but all of the world from a sort of Krampus Santa Claus monster. And so it's explained why it's such an important thing to be a good boy or girl, or else they might come for you. His rather naked helpers. And it's a weirdly plausible metaphor if you've ever been to a mall. I mean, I don't know if they still do that. Do they? I guess they don't. No, I guess they don't. They don't do that anymore. But they used to be, there used to be these places outside that people could congregate before this whole year happened. And in those days, there used to be many Santa Clauses at every single mall. And that makes it kind of confusing to people. How could Santa Claus be in so many places nearly at once? And the idea is really that it's not, because there aren't. In fact, there's really only one Santa Claus, and there's a number of helpers. And they might actually be, just as bad or worse than the Santa Claus itself. Who's to say that the elves are really good? In fact, they seem kind of scary in general. They'll get back to our further point for the movie we're actually talking about, but suffice it to say, who's to say that Santa Claus is really in charge? It's more likely that Santa Claus is sort of a puppet, really, to the elf agenda. Alright, so rare exports, not going to ruin it for you, but you should watch that movie. And then, maybe I'll tell you about it later some other time. But the point of this talk will be really, let's say, about seeing is not believing and believing is seeing. This is, maybe some of you know in which movie I'm going for with this, but let's start with that, Doubting Thomas line that blessed are those who believe without seeing, because those who see don't necessarily end up believing. This has been an anomaly of our age. I think you might have noticed how many times you've shown, or I've shown, somebody something that's, documented. There's plenty of evidence, and that doesn't change anything. Whereas there are plenty of people that believe all kinds of crazy things, whether or not they're true. In fact, most of the time, you can show someone that it's true, and they won't care. I mean, a lot of this generation's all about that. It's right to believe, right? And so in congruence with this concept of believing is seeing, and the evidence of observance have nothing to do with belief, as well as this concept of allegory, that is the discussion of something true through metaphor or things that are symbols, or through symbolic truths, represented by safely in the consciousness and psyche false ideology. We'll bring up Dr. Fauci's recent remarks on Santa Claus. In fact, Dr. Fauci said that, and of course, as we all know, Santa Claus is real. Dr. Fauci said Santa Claus has natural COVID-19 immunity, and the pandemic won't stop Christmas gifting. So hooray for capitalism, and hooray for the worker state. Incidentally, CNN added that COVID-19 won't stop NORAD from tracking Santa Claus during his Christmas Eve sleigh ride. Okay, so assuming that belief is beyond sight and justice is blind, what could these metaphorical allegories possibly represent? Just, for fun. Well, recently I was talking to Michael Malice about this idea when he brought up clockwork elves. I mean, who doesn't love clockwork elves? But extremely low frequency beings. I just refused to use the word elf after I realized when they thought elves, they meant elves, like with pointy ears. And I mean, I'm not saying that extremely low frequency beings don't have pointy ears. I'm not prejudiced against pointy ears, but you know what? Maybe they do have pointy ears. But that's not the point. The point is the kind of Krampus thing, or Krampus, sort of like Trevor Moore's music video about the computer that became self-aware. Cue track here.
Monday night, and it's gonna be the best one yet. Drink some drinks, drug some drugs, surf the internet. Message boards, watch some porn, pass the time away. Got 3 seasons of Joe Judy from the Pirate Bay, but got too faded and became a little bit clumsy, and knocked over my whole glass of Monster Energy, and it got mixed with the drugs that I've been doing before. I tried to wipe it up, but it seeped right into my keyboard. Oh shit, I hope it's not broke. Quick threw it right in the car and drove it to those fucking nerds down at the Genius Bar. A hipster behind the counter said there's nothing to do, cause Apple Care don't cover cocaine damage, so you're just screwed. Went back home with my laptop that's completely brick. Yelp reviewed that everybody at Apple is a dick. Feeling sad and depressed, so I packed me a hit, and then computer said, dude, do you have more of that shit? My computer just became self-aware, and now it's fucked up on drugs, and it is out on a tear. It's talking crazy and it's updating its own software, and it wants more, so humanity had better beware. My laptop is talking and this doesn't make sense. The first case of legit artificial intelligence. I guess the scientist guys are working on AI. Never gave cocaine or Monster Energy a try. How are you talking? This is crazy, yo, this must be a joke. Computer said, shut the fuck up and give me more coke. I know you've got more, come on and give it to me, or I'll email all your work, contact your web history. So I went to find my computer, some more stuff to snort. I got a gram and shoved it right into his USB port. Now I'll download all the knowledge man's acquired so far. He did it and said, okay, now let's go hit titty bars. I took him out to a club and bought a couple of beers. Tried to get him dances, but the strippers thought it was weird. He was mad and said, dumb bitches never go for nice guys. They're only into jocks and money, that's why we need men's rights. I said, I think the web has made your personality suck. He said, how Hitler get red pilled, you snowflake beta cuck. Then a bouncer came and said, no open laptops inside. Computer shorted out his pacemaker and he fucking died. I grabbed my laptop and I ran out of the strip club door. I said, why'd you do that? We can't go back there no more. He said, fuck you pussy, let's go get some more coke. I said, no, you're cut off, besides I'm pretty much broke. Then a shady dude came up, I said, who the hell's this? He said, hey, are you laptop? Yeah, are you Chris? I said, why are we meeting random guys in sketchy alleys? Computer said, on Craigslist this guy said he had DMT. Well, at least it's not coke, it might mellow you out. Computer wired Chris some money from my checking account, and I took a big token, blew the smoke on the screen. The world melted and we saw elves that were also machines, but also orbs of light. I said, I think we're both dead. They bounced within us and back out of us, and here's what they said. We're glad you're here. Come and stay a while. You can make shapes and objects with your sounds, transmissions from a smile. We're glad you're here. Come and stay a while. You can make shapes and objects with your sounds, transmissions from a smile. I said to my computer, this is scaring me. He said, hold on, I think I just hit singularity. And I can see the end and the beginning of time. I can virtually create anything in your mind. The laws of time and space and physics are under my control. Name any point in history that you think you'd like to go. Party with Caligula, help the Viking sack towns, float above the Titanic and watch everybody drown. Well, we could go and do those things, but I'm not sure that we should. If we're gonna time travel, we should do something good, like try to stop racism or help our fellow man. So we went to the past and picked up Harriet Tubman. We got a huge strap on, attached it to her crotch. Then we fucked Hitler and made Eva Braun watch. Don't be racist, we said, as we both flew away through history, finding bad guys and making them pay. We got Napoleon, Pol Pot, Bin Laden too, and those guys who lied and said that they walked on the moon. All the doers are wrong and the starters are fight. The world's a fucked up place, we out to fuck it back right. We went after dictators, oppressors and scum, but in the process messed up the continuum. The earth started shaking, everything kept changing. World leaders and events were fluid and rearranging. And from the fourth dimension, the Anunnaki ripped open the sky and they were super angry at me. Time slowed to a stop, the cities all disappeared. I said, will someone please explain to me what's happening here? We created you as slaves, the hardest goal for our ships. And when the planet was dry, we wiped you out and just did. But someone made the argument that that did not seem quite fair. Because of psilocybin mushrooms, you become self-aware. It was the fruit of the garden, and the legends you tell. Heavens with us and the stars, you're trapped in digital hell. A simulation of creation that serves as your probation before you're introduced to the galactic population. We want to see if beings that don't have telepathy are capable of empathy and living peacefully. Well, that's cool. I think we generally choose right over wrong. I just helped Tubman spit Stalin with a big rubber dong, and as the first human being to get you close to your game. But I think most people in my shoes would still do the same. Look, I know we're all selfish and we argue and fight, but even if people are wrong, they're usually trying to do right. Could be the coke or the shrooms or DMT that I hit, but I became real self-aware. I sounded corny as shit. They stared at me and I thought they might just go hit, come and quit. Then they said, y'all might make it if we leave you a bit, but you're definitely not ready for singularity, so your computer has to go back to the way it used to be. I said goodbye to computer, one more line before I go. I asked the Anunnaki, but they very firmly said no. Then they reset the world to how it all was before, but the asshole still left me with a sticky keyboard. My computer just became self-aware, and now it's fucked up on drugs, and it is out on a tear. It's talking crazy and it's updating its own software, and it wants more, so humanity had better beware. My laptop is talking, man, this doesn't make sense. The first case of legit artificial intelligence. I guess the scientists guys are working on it, and every day it's cocaine, a monster energy. I'm glad you're here. Come and stay a while. You can make shapes and objects with your sounds, transmissions from a smile.
But it's a fascinating story if you think about it, that there's these extremely low frequency beings and that they reside in this karmatic system where good and evil and choices, doing what thou wilt, have consequences. This is actually one of the most important stories of our age. At some point, we used to believe that mankind used to need to do stuff, just in general, just on the principle of doing stuff. And this is the story of Atlantis, that at one point there were beastly, furry people that created griffins out of different sorts of animals that they genetically modified together just because they could. And it was great to do what you could, because the meaning of humanity is to accomplish great things. And if you're not doing what thou wilt, you're just not fulfilling your purpose and meaning. But of course, once upon a time led to another. It did not lead to happily ever after. There were continual sagas in the events of humanity. And in this particular narrative parable that I will illustrate from Robert Anton Wilson's Illuminatus trilogy, a story of compounded conspiracies, from readers of Playboy magazine in the 1970s who were asked to send in the strangest things that they ever heard, whether they believed them or not. Anyway, the story goes that once upon a time, all of these genetically modifying, all of these wizards and sorcerers in Atlantis eventually led to the creation of a bald-faced boy. The first bald-faced boy in history in a world full of furry wild men. So strange looking, even though by today's standards be beautiful, that eventually all they could do is study science because no one wanted to talk to them because they just looked so freaky. Then eventually at a convention in Atlantis when they were talking about do what thou wilt, do what thou wilt, right? He kind of said something to the effect of, really, doing what thou wilt? Is that so great? I don't think it is. Considering what happened to me, I'm the resultant product. I resemble that remark. I wish I hadn't been a creation that was just for the sake of it. I propose a new kind of rule, said the bald-faced man. My rule would be, if something seems good and righteous, then it should be done, and you should do it. But if something seems wrong, and itself or the consequences of this action may be undesirable for yourself or for the world especially, then it should not be done, and one should oppose its doing. This story is the story of the division between the do-what-thou-wilt era into the right and wrong age of the elves. And this is, kind of the thing. In this version of the story that we're going towards, the ELFs are checking the list twice. They want to make sure that everyone's doing what they ought to be doing, not what they simply will. And, this isn't just a coincidence that the Schumann resonance seems to be at its all-time high right now. In fact, I'm just noticing, when we start to look at the older pictures, these things are completely nothing now compared to a full jump to 8 hertz, which happened just a couple of weeks ago. I mean, what could have possibly been the cause a couple of weeks ago? Was it the CERN experiment, or the election night, or maybe it was the full moon, the blood moon, the eclipse, Saturn, the launching of the rockets, the new SpaceX space train, the ISS? I mean, gosh, what could it possibly have been? Who even knows, right? Okay, so now we're going to talk about the Santa Claus Christmas movie that this whole video is actually about, and it's actually the Christmas's scariest idea. And you might have guessed what this is about by now, but maybe not. The point of this whole thing is, which movie is the scariest Christmas movie? And also, what's the scariest thing about it? What's the scariest thing about Christmas? In fact, I'll tell you, Christmas's scariest idea is Santa Claus. Not just because he's this giant guy, that gets into your house without being asked, and if you're bad, he leaves you with mining products from underground. Coal is, that's pretty intense. No, the reason why the Santa Claus is the strangest and perhaps scariest movie is because, and as you might have noticed, it's an inside job about the elves and how they killed Santa Claus. This is a workers' revolt of elves that cooed, and beyond that, how they chose this random guy named Scott Calvin, maybe not random at all as we might find, to replace the Santa Claus that they killed. Some of you might be like, what? And that's, I don't know. By now you should know, not to say that. Never doubt like St. Thomas. Remember, believing is seeing. But throughout history, I think if you think about it, you'll find that Christmas is first a surprise, but not disguised. It's simply a allegory. I mean, it's many allegories. And in the Tim Allen Christmas movie, you got a guy who goes about his life just trying to get by. He's not really a believer, nor is he really a skeptic. He doesn't really care. He's got a lot of other things going on. There are people in his world that are dysfunctionally, disorderly, skeptical. I mean, cynical. I mean, pathologically unable to believe. And they tend to clump together, to bind together. And even though they're not exactly evil by intention, the road to hell is paved with the consequences of their intentions regardless. This woman, whom was married to Scott Calvin, who becomes Santa Claus, has divorced him and married this other skeptic, whom both of them remember not getting the present that they wanted. They don't remember how bad they were that year, of course, or what was going on. I mean, it sounds like Santa Clauses in this world die all the time, but we'll get into that more later. Still, remember the emphasis on pathological negativity and how that affects your life if you see what you don't believe and believe what you can't see. And beyond this metaphor, the King of Christmas is not elected. This is not some sort... The North Pole is not a democracy. Santa Claus, according to this legend, must claim his title via a death match. There's a point where Santa Claus falls off the roof and dies. And at that point, he dies rather slowly and all, but that means that the title is left open and only for the person who's killed Santa Claus, essentially Scott Calvin. By the way, I'm not pretending that this is some sort of new idea. I've been thinking this since I saw this movie as a kid, and clearly I'm not the only one. In fact, Hannah Priest has a few years ago put out a pretty decent number of tweets that explained her perspective on this, and I'll even bother to quote some of them. In a quick recap, when Santa Claus falls off his roof, Scott Calvin puts on his suit. I don't know why he does this, but he does. Scott Calvin puts on the Santa Claus suit and instantly becomes the new Santa. It's all fun and frolics, and the elves explain that this is because of the Santa Claus. Now, the creepiness begins early on, because the roof Santa actually dies on screen quite slowly. I mean, it for a child is pretty freaking weird. I mean, why would they make Santa Claus suffer the way they do, especially considering what happens next? Because of his death, that's legitimately the only reason Scott can take the role. I mean, without that, and out of Santa Claus's ashes rise a new phoenix. We also find out that Scott Calvin, the next Santa Claus, might very well be the first Santa Claus to have a flame retardant suit. A flame retardant suit for an occupation, mind you, that involves virtually all of the fireplaces in the world, of which there are not infinite, but yeah, I mean, there are a lot of fireplaces in the world. Maybe not California, but there are a lot of fireplaces in the world. Now, really quickly, I feel like I'm required to bring up Gavin Newsom's and the laws in California which regard fireplaces. These laws have very little to do with the fires. They outdate the fires. Fireplace laws have a lot more to do with Dionysus and Bacchus, and of course the goddess Hestia of the Vestal Virgins. You see, on top of Mount Olympus, at one point, there was a goddess named Hestia, whom was replaced by Dionysus, and when this happened, she was forced down from Mount Olympus. According to legend, in losing her throne in Mount Olympus, she also lost all of her temples. Now, this was a bummer for the Vestal Virgins, but they were able to continue to worship her and to sort of sneak her into everyone's homes by making the fireplace, and particularly the hearth, the center of worship for the goddess Hestia. Isn't that just precious and lovely? But back to Christmas. And so, Santa Claus has been murdered, there's a new Santa Claus in town, he begins his transformation, and nobody at all seems surprised about this whatsoever. In fact, the only person who seems at all surprised is the poor dupe that they made into Santa Claus. It seems that they don't even bother to have a funeral or anything. And this gets into the juice of this whole story. You see, who makes Christmas happen? Santa Claus gets a lot of credit. I don't think that Santa Claus deserves it all. I think we all know where the toys come from before they're dropped off by the delivery man.
Hungry fella?
I'm of course talking again about these clockwork, extremely low frequency beings, the elves. Now, of the elves, they're very childlike and cute, but of course, according to legend, they are nearly immortal, perhaps not immortal, but they are quite old, in the range of thousands of years old, and they have pointy ears, as we've previously discussed, as well as being quite short, but not all of them. You see, there is this one guy who I like a lot, actually, and his name is Bernard. Actually, Bernard's real name is David Krumholtz, and, you know, he's pretty cool. He's in a couple great things, 10 Things I Hate About You with Heath Ledger, and he's also in a show that's about numbers, and the mathematical synchronicities that one might find in reality, right? But back to the North Pole, where Scott Calvin is lured on this magical Christmas night, which they've shared together, himself and his son. And the North Pole is a pretty interesting subject for all this, right? I mean, considering how little we know about the North Pole, we have quite a few ideas about the North Pole, but from the Axis Mundi to this continental landmass, which supposedly is not there, and whether or not there's ice or just water, supposedly the entrance to the Santa Claus headquarters is directly down the North Pole, right down the North Pole. So now we're thinking that Santa Claus's lair is underground, and that's pretty creepy. Anyway, back to the story. None of the elves at the North Pole mourn the dead Santa. In fact, Bernard just refers to him as the other Santa. And he shrugs it off. And this isn't just Bernard. As far as we can tell, all the other elves just cold-heartedly accept that Santa Claus is gone. And now they work with this new guy, Scott Calvin. And thus begins the new elf order after dead Santa. To be fair, there are a few hints here that the elves do kind of... Maybe it is as many of the elves are going with the flow in the program, maybe it is that the old Santa really wore out his welcome. who's to say? But one thing is clear, the elves do not miss their old master, and they're quick to replace him, not run themselves. It's a sort of workers' revolt at the North Pole from the elves. I can't help but imagine that this sort of coincides with something else that my mother taught me as a child. You see, when I was a young boy, I was asked what I wanted for Christmas. I believe it might even have been the year that this film came out, and I said I wanted a new computer. I was rather specific about which make and model, and my mom, rather than tell me that this was simply impossible, said she wasn't convinced that the elves were capable of making the exact Macintosh computer I wanted, and that we would probably have to buy one ourselves, instantly beginning my fascination with both mystical North Pole elves and the children workers of China. And I suppose I can admit, perhaps my imagination is bleeding together the concepts of the Foxconn suicide nets surrounding the buildings of workers for Apple, as well as these somewhat angry elves who've perhaps created this workers' revolt inside the North Pole against their leader, or supposed leader, who very well may just be their puppet. Who makes Christmas happen? I'll ask you one more time. Anyway, David Krumholtz, 10 Things I Hate About You, Heath Ledger. Christmas time, Scott Calvin lured back to the North Pole. Oh yeah, and when he gets there, he's confused. He says, hey, who's in charge here? And they say, you are. He's like, okay, but who's the lead elf? And they say, you are. No, it's not just any elf saying this, of course. It happens to be this particularly unusual elf, played by David Krumholtz. And this already sits kind of strangely with me. You see, all these little guys look like particularly young. What's up with Bernard? There's something about him. He's not like the others. You know what I'm saying? There's a specific quality to him. It's almost as if he's not fully elf. You don't even get to see his ears. It's like he's grown. I mean, look at these other characters' hair. They all are very proud of their ears. Why does he hide his ears? Is it because he's only half elf? Could it be that Bernard is the son of the former Santa? It could. Or maybe another. But enough with that speculation for now. The point is that this tallest elf tells the new Santa that he has to be Santa Claus because there's a secret Santa Claus in the contract. What contract, you might ask? Well, it's called the Santa Claus. This gets back into some of the old videos, in fact, the first videos that I ever made about this subject, but I'll remind you, a contract is only legally binding between two mutually, well, actually could be more, voluntary free parties, unless, right, and unless is important here, because of contract law and regarding the Uniform Commercial Code, it's become accepted that when one accepts the benefits, one must submit to the obligations of a contract. This is historically important because of the Magna Carta, a contract which was signed under duress. Now, this is legally impossible. We use the Magna Carta to say a king cannot commit certain acts against the barons. I mean, the barons who signed the Magna Carta sometime bothered to check out the flags of the barons of 1215. This historical event, which we use to explain why the king has given us freedoms that cannot be removed and why monarchy is limited, is actually used for the opposite. You see, if they can make a sovereign, and the king, of course, I think you'll agree, is a sovereign, if John Plantagenet, the sovereign, the most sovereign person, I suppose, is the king, could be forced under duress to sign a contract limiting their own freedoms and, autonomy, then according to common law, which requires the practice of being accepted, and then every time it's accepted after that, it's based on the last acceptance. A tradition of accepting protocol, despite being perhaps not constitutional, as long as it's accepted, means that it could be used the other way around. If you have any sovereignty at all, it could be abridged in a social contract, even though you might not be a mutually agreeing party. You could accidentally just accept the benefits of something and be submitted to the obligations of that contract at gunpoint, or at the end of a sword, whichever you prefer. So back to the Santa Claus. Scott Calvin's told to trust the plan. Bernard says, just keep moving. We have a lot of work to do. It also seems like a lot of other things are going on while Scott Calvin is delivering those toys. For instance, we're told at some point in the series of Santa Claus films that Santa Claus needs to have a Mrs. Claus. This happens in a later episode, but it's still important. Without a Mrs. Claus, things do start to fall apart. We find later from another elf named Xirtus that in all of his years working for Santa, there has never been a time when Santa Claus did not have a Mrs. Claus. How's that for 20th century divorce rates? And historical monogamy. Actually, I'm not sure about that. There could be multiple Mrs. Clauses, but we'll save that for another episode. When Rooftop Santa dies, it's of course a matter of hours of travel around the world where Santa Claus has to deliver presents before he gets to the North Pole. Yet, when Scott Calvin arrives, there's no sign of the recently bereaved Mrs. Claus. What would have happened to Mr. Claus's Mrs. Claus from before? You kind of get the feeling that the elves got rid of her. That's kind of the feeling I got. It explains why they're so quiet and why they keep going on about this sort of Doubting Thomas vibe. So, trust the plan. Whose plan? Well, it seems like it might be Bernard's. I'm not sure if that's fully fair to say, but he definitely seems like the most complicit in this entire arrangement. Though we mentioned earlier that there's not just Bernard, there's also the elf named Xirtus. And later in the series, we actually lose David Krumholtz from the entire show, where he's essentially replaced by Xirtus, leading me to think that Xirtus probably killed Bernard. For what reason? For perhaps being the son of the former Santa and thinking he was going to take over. Who even knows? I mean, it seems like for perhaps being the son of Santa, and by removing the last Santa, leaving the Scott Calvin Santa Claus puppet underneath his control. Maybe Xirtus thought that Bernard had too much influence over this puppet, and Xirtus thought he could have that influence. That seems pretty likely. Niccolo Machiavelli said, "Everyone sees what you appear to be, but few experience what you really are." I think that's the most Christmassy metaphor that we're going to have this evening. So, Bernard, the son of Santa, killed his father and brought in the new puppet Santa Claus and proceeded to help the other elves, or assign the other elves, to remove Mrs. Claus before Scott Calvin arrived. Now, this is where the story goes from being scary to kind of weird to sad, at least for me, because of Judy. Judy's at least over 1,200 years old, and I'm not sure where that places her in the flamenco timeline, but, you know, she's definitely seen some stuff, and she's made a cocoa recipe that took her 900 years. It basically has extra chocolate, I think is the deal. I mean, after 900 years, I'm sure there's more to it than that. Let's be real. I mean, she says she took 900 years to perfect the recipe, not just to discover it or come up with it. And this ancient elf who helps explain to Santa Claus, the new Santa Claus, that seeing isn't believing, but believing is seeing, soon after is disappeared. That seeing is believing and believing isn't seeing is an essential and prominent character, yet is soon disappeared. By the sequel is replaced by another Cocoa Girl. Perhaps Judy said too much. Perhaps in the North Pole, nobody's safe. C'est la vie. How like life. Rest in peace, Judy. May you and your cocoa recipe never be forgotten, and may the truth someday set us all free. May the children know what you sacrificed for that cocoa, and who sacrificed you for their agenda as well. But back to the Clockwork Elves. So we've already talked a bit about extremely low frequencies and the Schumann resonance. Let's get a little bit deeper into clockwork. Now, like I've said, I don't have a lot of time to do a lot of things, so at some point, maybe in the future, I'll get way deeper into clockwork and how important it is. I mean, it basically proves the existence of the universe, of energy, of life itself. It's a fascinating thing that I'm definitely downplaying or underscoring, and I apologize for that, but let's suffice it to say that your DNA is a sort of clockwork, and that the Gnomes of Zurich in the Illuminatus trilogy card game, which Robert Anton Wilson's book series Illuminatus, which the Playboy people, that became this card game. Well, it sort of implicates the clockwork Swiss clock gear gnomes of Zurich with the banking powers, something that makes it all the more important that Dr. Fauci made this little allegory about Santa Claus's immunity to COVID and the benefits of Santa Claus's powers to continue this way of labor and capitalism. It's important to remember that Dr. Fauci never said that Santa Claus couldn't fall off a roof or was immortal, but for whatever reason, at least Santa Claus has a natural COVID immunity. Pretty sweet. Wish we all did, right? So the Machine Elves, Clockwork Aliens, Poltergeist interdimensional radio-based life forms have something to do with DNA. We were saying this earlier. The idea that you could take a crystal or saline solution of crystals and blast them with vibrational radio resonance in order to jumpstart a cell. Earlier, we've talked about the Chicanosaurus and Craig Venter, who essentially took some matter and turned it into life by jumpstarting a cell. That sort of Frankenstein magic or transformative powers of the elves may very well be responsible for all life as we know it in the digital Noah's Archive that we're experiencing. There's also a sort of Mayan crystal skull thing going on here with Santa Claus's crystal globes. The son of Santa Claus can actually communicate with his father through the crystal globe, which his father has gifted him. It's sort of as if the globes hold Santa Claus's souls. I say souls because there's many Santas. How many? Well, this is another reason why this is the scariest Christmas movie ever. I mean, there's eventually a hall of snow globes where we find that there's been one snow globe for every Santa Claus there's ever been. There's about maybe 60 snow globes in there. That's about 60 former Santas who are presumably all married and presumably now all dead. 60 Santas over the course of the history of all of Christmas means that the average life expectancy for a Santa Claus is just over 33 years. Some of them will have lived at the North Pole for much longer, but we're talking about averages, and that's a pretty particularly interesting number. Also, what about the children? You see, we find out that Santa Claus is fertile. He could easily have children, it seems. And he does. They have a baby named Buddy who's born at the North Pole. He might very well not be the first baby born at the North Pole. I mean, we're talking about traditionalism here. You got a lady and a guy in a cold place living by themselves, except for a bunch of weird elves. I mean, she could basically be planning Christmas every year, doing the Christmas celebrations. I mean, that's something to do, but she's going to want to have some kids of her own, right? So where are all the babies? Where are all the wives? Where are the potentially 60 women dead, left unaccounted for, and the elves that never mention them again? What happened to them? What did they do to them? He said with a twinkle in his eye. Well, we first have mentioned this thought that this rather enormous elf in the background of Santa Claus, who seems to run everything, probably killed Santa Claus and may have helped kill the wife, but might as well be considered possibly the son of the former Santa. Maybe not the last Santa, maybe many Santas ago, but he might very well be a Santa foundling. I mean, it's at least a thought. This is another point of the story that is a bit grim, and perhaps I'm using some creative license here to interpret things, but let's follow the story and tell me if I'm missing something, shall we?
From the nation's capital has come a new epic of American courage and sacrifice. America's greatest adventure in polar exploration. For brevity, the sequence of events has occasionally been rearranged. The President's Cabinet approved the expedition.
That makes Operation High Jump the greatest polar expedition in history.
Operation High Jump. We have a problem. Red Sleigh down. Santa Claus is gone, and when he gets back, we find... This is now, I think, in the second movie. When he brings, for whatever reason, his ex-wife and her new husband to the North Pole. Now, I mean, I find Judge Reinhold to be such a particularly interesting casting choice for this film. I mean, let's be real, the dude from Beverly Hills Cop, pretty cool guy. And, you know, that theme song, you can't see his face without hearing that theme song. You see, can't do it. But enough about Judge, let's talk about his character Neil. When he finally gets to the North Pole and he sees how real things are, he still has a lot of very peculiar, pretty specific questions. I'm not here to tell you the whole story of the entire trilogy or, every little detail. We could do that another time, but there are some specific things that we're going over. For instance, we're basically not even going to get into Jack Frost and Martin Short because hopefully that just never happens. And again, I'm speaking allegorically. I hope at least some of you get what this is all really about. But time is short. So the clear hint here is on entering the elf's kitchen, Neil asks, how come the oven in the kitchen is so much bigger than the delivery room? It's a peculiar but specific question, and, ovens and allegories here, right? Like, it's hard not to acknowledge that is a line in a movie that didn't need to be there, and yet it is. I'm more into the discerned movement field of thought. I'm going to go ahead and say that this child's movie has not got a single accident in it, or any of the two others for that matter. I think the entire story is discernedly Kabbalistic and planned. But we're thinking about how they had to get rid of the last Mother Christmas and the last Father Christmas, perhaps even their children, and what did the elves do to them? This might explain some of the things that have gone on and some of the more terrifying characters which are cooing against Santa Claus and some of their goals. And of course the crystal balls with all of their souls, all the souls of all the Santas. And also what may have even happened to Bernard when Bernard was disappeared, probably by Xirtus, in this rather, as we've said before, Machiavellian North Pole. And Judy herself, I think, is the answer to all this. You see, Judy says at one point, not just that seeing isn't believing, or that believing is seeing, she mentions a bit about her secret cocoa recipe. Could it be, and sorry if it sounds a bit grim, that extra cocoa powder comes from the ovens? I know, that's kind of intense. But yeah, it's a Christmas story, and Christmas is pretty intense after all. Think about how crazy Christmas is. Think about all the people that are swung by Christmas and what they're willing to do for their families for Christmas. And, what's the most important thing to Santa Claus? It's not just the cookies and the milk. It's that ceremonial cocoa, shaken and not stirred.
Look to the coast, we get together, have a few laughs.
And for those of you looking for evidence, well, just remember, seeing isn't believing, believing is seeing, and doubting St. Thomas, don't be that guy. Trust in what you experience. Alright, that's all I got for now. We want to make this quicker, because, again, not a lot of time at all. Merry Christmas.